Tonight we bring you a special edition of The Beat with reporting to inform a key question facing voters next year. If the leading candidates for both parties face off again as they did before, who will protect the nation and the public interest? Both men have, of course, now served as presidents, so their actual records can be assessed. And for all the understandable focus on Trump's legal problems and controversies and rhetoric, it was his substantive handling of the COVID pandemic that impacted so many lives and dragged him down in the eyes of many Americans who concluded he failed that task when faced with that all-important leadership test. As for Trump, he said at the time he did not see the emergency as his test of a lifetime.
Was there a moment in all of this last 2 months where you said to yourself, this is the leadership test of a lifetime?
No, and no hesitation. Now that is a small part of one of Trump's newsworthy interviews with the legendary journalist Bob Woodward, conducted across the outbreak of the pandemic and through the 2020 campaign. Woodward secured more time with President Trump than any other writer. 20 interviews across that stretch, Trump sometimes making the calls, something he apparently now regrets. The former president is suing Woodward, we should note, over publishing these interviews that he agreed to. Many legal experts say Trump would be likely to lose based on the current law. Now, Woodward published the interviews in his latest book, The Trump Tapes, which provides reporting to support his assessment that Trump is a unique, unparalleled danger to the nation. That conclusion goes farther, quite frankly, than much of the journalism that Woodward has been known for, a chronicler of 10 presidents, from breaking stories across Watergate that upended the Nixon era and history itself, to deep looks at Clinton, Bush, and the Obama years. 21 books in all. Most made the bestseller list, if you check. 2 Pulitzer Prizes. And I want to tell you up front, this special we're doing tonight is built around Woodward's reporting, along with additional government material, public sourcing, and a walk through the recent archives of this pandemic era. So, after we show you what we are learning tonight, we will turn to Mr. Woodward, who joins us later in this program. But first, we're going to walk through some of his reporting, largely chronologically as the pandemic first hit America. If journalism is the first draft of history, well, let me put it like this. Tonight we are attempting at least the beginning, or a bit of, or a stab at the second draft of history, documenting the pandemic's early days with knowledge that has also been gathered later. Knowledge that you see was developed over time as headlines and reporters and all the information came in that this virus would define our lives and would cause so many deaths, killing more than 1 million Americans, more than the number of Americans killed in both world wars. Again, we all lived through it. We think we know it. We're tired of it. It took more of our fellow citizens' lives than both world wars, so this couldn't matter more. It also, of course, upended the social contract, law, politics, our economy, our jobs, in ways that do continue to reverberate even today. So what we're doing tonight is trying to apply this knowledge, as well as the contemporaneous reporting, on what the president was thinking and doing in private at the time, which sometimes bluntly contradicted his public vows to the nation. Meaning, even in those early days, there's evidence Trump knew it was false to say this back in March 2020.
It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
It will go away. Just stay calm. It will go away. It'll go very quickly.
I think we're going to be in very good shape. You know it is going away, and it will go away, and we're going to have a great victory.
Trump was proven wrong, of course. The facts show something that may be worse, though. He had reason to know he was wrong at the time, that he was playing it down as a type of strategy, even as in other early conversations he admitted that prioritizing accurate warnings would be better, while also referring to how he continued to just play it down.
They should have let it be known it was a problem 2 months earlier. I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down because I don't want to create a panic.
That was March. It was early in that period when COVID was heading through America, but it was also clear this couldn't be played down. COVID first ravaged New York City as the epicenter of it, you may recall. Schools closed March 15th. Then there was the impending ventilator shortage. And Trump's first foray into emergencies was limiting ventilators furnished by the federal government, 10 days later, New York hospitals were described as that apocalyptic scene. Still, though, references to a then mysterious new virus killing patients in ways doctors could not yet understand, let alone prevent. That was not a surprise to then President Trump or White House officials, because this had been laid out in briefings and warnings and intelligence. Which brings us again back to these Woodward tapes, because Trump tells the journalists something that is damning given that overall record. Trump recounts how he told his own son, Barron, that warnings were needed months earlier.
So you told Barron, you said it's bad, and then...
I said no. I said it's a very bad thing, but we're going to straighten it out.
Did he have any other questions about, like,
He said,
how
how
are
did it
you...
happen? I said it came out of China, Barron. Pure and simple. It came out of China, and it should have been stopped. And to be honest with you, Barron, they should have let it be known it was a problem 2 months earlier, and we wouldn't. The world would now. We have 141 countries have it now. And I said the world wouldn't have a problem. We could have stopped it easily.
Now, if it was so easy to stop, that would beg the question why it wasn't stopped. But the warnings go beyond, say, just scientists who should have been heeded. Again, with what we've learned over time, it's important to note that Trump was hearing this from many different sources. One of his most loyal political aides tried to give him the same warning about 2 months before the tape you just heard. Peter Navarro, a trade advisor who was later involved in efforts to overturn the election, actually pressed Trump with a dire memo warning the coming pandemic could reach the U.S. and leave Americans defenseless in the case of a full-blown coronavirus outbreak, as the Times reported. It was another month later when the CDC issued their warning that COVID would likely spread to the point that entire schools could be shuttered, that it was inevitable. And that week, the Dow was plummeting in the largest one-day decline in history, which was, of course, a response to those warnings. Now, some of these details are familiar because we lived through them. But when you take them all together, they suggest Trump was warned by everyone from experts to the loyal aides he listened to on other topics, and that he had time to prepare. And faced with that leadership test, he simply didn't prepare, didn't do the work. Turn to the tapes. Keep those facts in mind for this exchange from April, where Woodward presses Trump on why he wasn't trying to take more actions to quell the virus.
Recordings just got better.
What is the first person who made you see how serious this was going to be?
China, when I saw how many people were dying.
But wasn't that in early February when you talked to President Xi?
No, it was earlier than that. Look, I did the stop, I think in January sometime, toward the later part of January, Bob.
Yes. I suspect if you say, sir, full mobilization at Manhattan Project level here.
No matter what I do, they'll always tell you bad.
Okay, but you know what?
I don't care.
I think people want, even people who don't like you, people who are opposed to you, want this country to succeed on this.
No, I think there are some people that would rather have it not succeed. Okay, that's a big statement, right?
I hope not. I mean,
okay, well, I disagree with you. There are some people that would rather have it not succeed so that they could possibly beat me in the election.
But they're irrelevant.
They're significant, and they're lying, and they control some of the media, not all of it. I'm doing fine in much of the media, but there's a lot of really fake news out there, Bob.
Gives you a window, and we do have a lot of indications. Most people inside the country wanted the country's effort to succeed because they could see what was happening. They wanted the death wave to stop. They didn't want to join it. That early body count was rising so fast. You remember there were those makeshift morgues built to try to keep up. New York City deaths doubled compared to what they usually were in that time frame. That was unlike any spike in history. Only one that comes close, if you look at the data, was 9/11. We'll return to that point tonight as well, the notion of mobilization against different threats. But the densely populated areas were the first to face this pandemic's intensity. And Trump knew what I just showed you earlier, but was pressing on with the promises of a reopening.
So I would love to have the country opened up and just raring to go by Easter.
This country was meant to be open and vibrant and great, not where people are, staying. And we've solved every problem. We solved it quickly. Studies, the CDC is advising the use of non-medical cloth face covering. This is voluntary. I don't think I'm going to be doing it.
He doesn't think he's going to do it. That would change too, which we'll get to. But again, what we learned, knowing what we know now, that's how he sounded. Then you head into May 2020, the U.S. hit 100,000 deaths, the kind of number that shocked people, but it was a fraction of what would come to be a death toll of 1 million Americans. And Trump's COVID press conferences offered a stream of consciousness, kind of minimizing of the problem at times. But in these tapes, there's a different note. Occasionally, Trump acknowledged, for example, the reality of COVID flaring up around the world, then veering back to the claims he had it under control.
It's flaring up all over the world, by the way, all over the world. That was one thing I noticed last week. Yes. They talk about this country. All over the world it's flaring up, but we have it under control.
The cases were skyrocketing when Trump said that, breaking records for the largest single case spikes to date. Dr. Fauci was leading public health messaging, encouraging more drastic measures like the lockdowns in areas with surging cases. And again, I just showed you how Trump sounded then, but here's how he and other officials sounded, hitting a different note than Trump's response.
More than 57,000 new cases of coronavirus have been reported in the U.S. in the past 24 hours, setting yet another record for new infections.
The death toll up 46% in the course of a week.
We are still knee-deep in the first wave of this.
We cannot ignore it, and we cannot call it a hoax, and we cannot misrepresent the facts.
That was also July. Now, everyone knows COVID was a health crisis, but it also morphed into a misinformation and propaganda crisis. And as Donald Trump now runs for office again, it is worth recalling the lengths he went to blame and confuse the issue. He took the unprecedented step of making the U.S. formally quit the main international body for coordinating this kind of response, exiting the World Health Organization in the middle of a pandemic. If you saw that in a movie, it might seem like a hard plot point to believe. That was amidst the testing shortage, cases peaking. And there were other steps as well. Trump later made a step towards publicly supporting masks, even publicly donning one himself. These tapes also show, though, that no emergency would deter Trump's focus on re-election. Now, to be fair with history, he's not the first president to face a crisis while caring about re-election. But the tapes also suggest something that might come across as a deeper problem, a kind of constant linking of the cost of the virus and his lost political advantages. Trump voicing to Woodward his blunt view that COVID is what tripped up his campaign, and almost casually talking about the impact and the cost of this pandemic more in a metric of Trump rallies lost rather than lives lost.
If we didn't have the virus, I was 10, 12 points up. I was cruising to election.
Yeah. Well, people are worried about the virus.
I know that, Bob, but the virus had nothing to do with me. With COVID, you really can't do rallies, probably airport rallies, but you can't do the stadium rallies. You can't do the indoor arena rallies.
Okay, you are running against the virus, not Joe Biden.
Well, I'm running against both. You'll see the plan, Bob. I've got 106 days. We were riding high. The election was over. I was going to win easily. And all of a sudden we got hit by the China virus, and now I'm working my ass off.
Few presidents have ever been captured lamenting that a threat to the nation required them to work hard, or contrasting accurate advice shared with their own family to the misleading information they're presenting to the nation. And like some other recent issues, it's all on tape. Tapes that Trump is now suing over as he asks the nation for another opportunity to lead it. Thanks for being here. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
We've spoken about this. Now we're sharing it with the viewers. What do you think this all shows?
Shows a negligence to a national security problem. for the country a national health problem. And it turns out in the reporting, and this is on tape, that Trump National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien and his deputy, Matt Pottinger, went to Trump in early January. That's the year that Trump is running for re-election. And O'Brien tells Trump the coming virus will be the biggest threat, be the biggest national security threat to your presidency. Now, I've covered 16 national security advisors, going back to Henry Kissinger, and never heard that stark, dramatic warning that O'Brien gave. His deputy, Matt Pottinger, an expert on China, had been there for 7 years as a Wall Street Journal reporter, told the president, I have contacts in the medical underground that tell me in China that this is going to come in a way that there will be 650,000 deaths. A wake-up call. Trump listened and then spent months and months saying, oh no, it's going to go away. So 6 months later, this is the moment you capture here where he says, oh, we've got it under control. And you can hear this in his own voice. And I say to him, under control, 140,000 people have died in this country since the virus and since it came. That's 6 months of no action.
Was it clear from your access to him and those conversations at the time that he had absorbed some of these warnings, that he did know it was going to be that bad?
Well, it took me months to learn about the warnings from his national security advisors. And when I learned about it, I was dumbfounded. And we were in the middle of the crisis, and he still was not acting. This idea of we have it under control, it was never under control. It intentionally was never under control. And the problem with Trump is I think he looks at democracy as enemy territory, to be quite frank, because that's the people, and he always wants it to be about him. And you listen to 8 hours of and it's all about, oh, no, everything is fine. I know what I'm doing. And when you lay it all out, he did not know what he was doing, and he didn't care.
And Bob, that goes to one of the points we explored in comparing your tapes to what was done at the time. There were people who were factual at the time, even though there was more to learn. What does it tell you that for him, he viewed this often as a propaganda or PR challenge? Get people to either blame someone else or not think it's that bad, rather than what you described it, which was a test of leading the nation, the work, not the spin.
We can hear it in his own words. When we go over that time when 140,000 people were killed, and he said, oh, it's under control. I said, what's the plan?
Yeah.
And he said, oh, well, you'll, in 106 days, learn the plan. That's election day. He's focused on the election. And what's the plan now? He said, well, if I put it out, people would not remember it. I mean, you don't need to remember a plan. You need to
execute
on it.
So then we have, I want to play this for you, Bob, because we've got so much tape. A really unusual exchange, and it's your attempt to, yes, question him, but also he is, I think everyone understands, difficult to deal with in many ways. So you're almost pushing your way in to say, well, no, here's the things, and you're talking through it with him.
You need to mobilize.
Yes.
You need to
so I'm going to play this,
and
then we have, because it's tapes, you know, everyone's on tape, a cameo by your wife.
Yes.
Pretty interesting. I'll let the tape do the talking. Let's discuss on the other side. Take a listen.
It's time to switch to Verizon. Sadie did. When you
because I'm going to talk
Okay,
about...
what I'll do is send them to Jared, or you want me to...
Read them out. Go ahead, read them.
Okay, the first is testing. It's got to be a Manhattan Project. Number 2, the medical supply chain has to be made as perfect as it can be. Experts say you may have to federalize that. Number 5, shelter in place. That there needs to be a national order. I know you don't want to wear a mask. The experts are saying, I hear the briefing, sir. 6 is the food supply.
You were really shouting at him.
I was. To get in the word edgewise.
Shouting, though. It's really loud.
It's okay. It's okay.
You want to get more
I know.
information from him, not
Like this, I agree.
not telling him what he needs to do. You kind of sounded like you were telling him what to do.
Yeah, well, saying, I kept, okay, but we're in a different world now, sweetie.
I think that's got to be fascinating to some people. Tell us about that.
Well, she's right. I was shouting at him because I had information from the doctors on this saying he needed to mobilize. He needed to define things like what is a national obligation. Let's coordinate internationally. I had a list of 12 things, and he listens to them, and then after he tweets the next day, oh, there's light at the tunnel. At the, we are seeing light at the end of the tunnel.
You're known for covering presidents. Had you ever addressed any president like that?
No, I have not.
And so the question to you is your wife partly right that you had...
She's completely right.
Go ahead.
And I said it's a different time.
Yeah.
When I have information that I had from people who are doctors, people who are not partisan, people who want to address this national crisis, I am going, and I have access to the President of the United States, and I'm going to say, this is what I'm learning. What are you doing? And the answer is, and this is the tragedy, this is the sickness for the country, that he says, oh, as I said, there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's going to go away. And anyone who knows anything about this knows it's not going away. And Matt Pottinger's estimate of 650,000 people dying.
Yeah.
Now it's twice that, 1.1 million dying. And so we have this moment where the president can see the numbers, and he's in a kind of political and personal denial. And I once asked him, I said, what's the job of the president? And he said, to protect the people. I've never seen such a failure to protect the people.
Yeah, and that's such an important bookend, that failure, and we're in a different world. And we're going towards, again, another election where people have to be informed, not just about the controversies, not just about their opinions of him and his other objectionable qualities, according to many, but as you say, the main test that he faced.
No, I don't take responsibility for this. I have nothing to do with this.
Yeah, well...
I take responsibility for solving the problem.
Okay.
But I don't take responsibility for this, no. It was no fault of mine, and it was no fault of anybody's. This happened, except maybe China.
Our special continues, and we are now joined by Dr. Kavita Patel, the former Obama White House health policy advisor. Bob Woodward still with us. When you take this all together, Doctor, what stands out to you?
Well, I think it's remarkable that we have a parallel universe that Donald Trump was living in. You describe kind of where he got his information from, who he did not listen to. He had this COVID task force that he asked Vice President Pence to put together, but it was basically for theater because, as we know, all of the recommendations, Fauci, eventually Birx, anybody that was part of that team, including Pence himself, that he didn't take that advice, nor did he even heed the advice of kind of doctors or people that he talked to describing how bad the virus was. And I think what's hard for those of us who are kind of working clinically and policy-wise as well, In parallel, there were those mask shortages, confusion about whether this was airborne, what kind of direction we could give a public, including ourselves, that were fearful for our lives. Because once that first, what we thought was the first death in February of 2020 in Washington state happened, and a lot of the news from China and from Italy and Spain and other European countries filtered forward, we knew that this was not a virus that we could just dismiss, and that anything coming out of the president's mouth, including it raised suspicion even from the trusted advisors the president had around him. There were moments that, whether it was Jerome Adams, the Surgeon General, or Tony Fauci, kind of the medical advisor, where you couldn't trust the source, even those were the very people that we should have trusted.
Right, because it was almost like when we mentioned this propaganda approach was also spreading out. And Bob, when you look at this urging that sometimes you did, we have in July 2020 focused on the campaign and gets defensive when you talk about responsibility. Let's play that.
You have to be fair, I think.
That includes being fair, but
nobody's done what I've done, Bob, in 3.5 years, and then the virus came along. That's not my fault.
But the virus,
it's China's fault.
Lindsey Graham is right. You are running against the virus, not Joe Biden.
Well, I'm running against both.
This picks up where we left off with you, Bob, which was, yes, you ask questions, but sometimes, especially with someone like this, you make statements, you make assertions, you're trying to get something back out of him. What are you doing there, and what were you hoping to get out of him?
Well, I'm trying to understand what's going on. I mean, here, the great lesson of government is not only do you have to listen to people, but you have to take them seriously. You have to understand their advice. Here you have Matt Pottinger going to the president and saying, really, this virus is coming. It's going to be a wildfire. It's a 3-alarm fire. 50 years, what goes on in the Oval Office, what the president hears from advisors. Very rare for somebody to say, you've got a 3-alarm fire coming, and this is not just somebody who walked in off the street. This is somebody who knows.
Well, and let me bring Dr. Patel in on this very point, because we talk about learning from all this, right? Could we handle another such emergency? Are we improved or not? Many people see the problem, and then you compare that to what Bob is referring to, the idea that a world war or a 9/11 sharpens something because of the role of enemies and evil. It summons something in us that is not proportionate to the threat or the body count. COVID was quite literally this kind of threat, where you have the president getting the warning that Bob mentions. I want to listen to how Bob, again, on the tapes, raises that with the internal warnings, with these national security advisors. Take a look.
I think the exact phrase I used was, this will be the biggest national security threat you face in your presidency.
So then you guys made your presentation to Trump. Did he say anything?
Well, he listened to it carefully.
Was there a moment in all of this last 2 months where you said to yourself, this is the leadership test of a lifetime?
No.
Introducing Russell & Smith Ford's Rewards Program. Send a friend to Russell & Smith Ford and earn rewards. For the first buyer you bring, we'll reward you $350. For the second, it's $400. And for the third and every after, $450. Email rewards@rsford.com to get started.
First to Bob.
Well, it was, and he has this responsibility. He ran for president and he is elected. And the level of negligence here, I mean, you have to listen to 8 hours of this, and it's denial, it's pushback, it's not my responsibility, I'm trying to play it down. The job of the president when you have a crisis is not to play it down, to share the information with the public. I mean, just think, hypothetically, after he gets this warning from his national security advisors, an alarm bell like I've never heard rung in the Oval Office to the President of the United States. So suppose when he gave the State of the Union address about 10 days later, instead of saying, oh, we're working with China and everything is fine, he said, I got a warning the likes of which I and you have never heard. Here's what it is. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to mobilize. We're going to understand. We're going to see. He would have been reelected in 2020 in a blink.
And to Bob's point, that's not partisan. You could imagine a Bush Senior or take a President Nixon. I don't know if you know, Bob, new President Nixon.
I've heard.
There are other presidents who, when it comes to that part of the job, could have done that working off the facts. This president failed to do that. That is pretty established. And so my question to you going forward is there any way that we can summon the reaction we get to a foreign threat or to a 9/11 to something like this? I mean, you just imagine if this were bio-war, people might have actually done more than what we lived through, where it was almost seen as like, well, I guess it's a hurricane. I guess we'll just wait around and deal.
I think some of us did think it was on that level, though. I think that if you didn't even have to work inside of hospitals or watch the morgue trucks backing up. Now we have over 100 million Americans that have had COVID or have had some cases of COVID they suspected. Everybody knows someone who's died from COVID, or more people. I've had now 100+ deaths from it of patients I know. So we all felt like we were living that war. And I think that is our country ready for it again? I will say the Biden administration came in, put back into place our relationship with the World Health Organization, put back into place much of what we needed for a national infrastructure. A lot of that kind of call that Bob kind of kept pressing the president on. Why don't we have a Manhattan Project? Well, they actually did that in the Trump administration with vaccines. But you didn't hear...
They did, and this is important to give Trump credit for it.
Right.
But then when Biden came in, Jeff Zients, who was the COVID person in the White House then, now Biden's chief of staff, Bob Costa and I in our book Peril outline in detail how Zients and Natalie Quinlan turned it around and delivered vaccines to people in an aggressive way.
That's right.
Organized
Testing.
it. It's an amazing... we lay it out in Peril, but it was a success. So there's not much coverage.
I'm running out of time, but Dr. Patel, do you agree we're in a different world now, as
we're in a very
we
different
heard
world.
on the tape?
We're in a very different world, and I think there's a lot of reasons we're in the different world. Number one, we have threats that we haven't even understood. It's not just bioterrorism. We modeled that in the Obama administration, but we couldn't have even thought of some of the forms of bioterrorism, taking down kind of our standard labs, having threats with infiltration of computers that can take down any sort of even national surveillance system. And we haven't learned, even with the Biden administration, we've taken away the public health funding to create that very infrastructure to stand up the Manhattan Project if we need it. And then the humanity that's missing. I think a lot of us that kind of have survived and watched these deaths, what I would have loved to have seen from the president was that moment of humanity that we saw when Joe Biden finally let the candlelight vigil not far from here for the lives that we lost.
Right, which is part of what we've shown, what we lived through. You can't just run from it without facing it.
Right.
Dr. Patel, thanks for joining us, Bob. I have one more set of questions for you in our special when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to this special edition of The Beat as we explore Bob Woodward's Trump tapes. And we've been going behind the scenes, especially at the end of the Trump presidency, and these extensive conversations with Bob Woodward. As for the results, well, we all lived through it, but there's many ways to count. There was a congressional probe in 2021 that found Trump made deliberate efforts to even undermine the United States' own government response to COVID. Now, one of the other points we wanted to get to was something you might say would be a hard question of anyone, but especially this particular subject, as Mr. Woodward did ask then President Trump to self-reflect on all of this and got responses like this.
What grade would you give yourself on the handling of the coronavirus?
Well, I think I'd give myself a very good grade, Bob, because what we've done is, we were totally, when I took over, there was nothing, there were no provisions, no anything for this.
What have you learned about yourself? You have to have learned.
That I can handle more than other people can handle. More people come up to me and say, And I mean very strong people, people that are successful even, a lot of people. They say, I swear to you, I don't know how it's possible for you to handle what you handled.
And with Mr. Woodward here, it would only be right to also touch on the world we're in right now, a president under investigation, a president awaiting trials. And when you look at their dealings here on more than one topic, there are some parallels in the way that Donald Trump, even against evidence, tries to argue why he is a certain way or whether he was too busy to deal with, well, what's on his plate.
Dear friend, do you see this man? On the right